Hi, I'm Kyle with DIY Auto Homeschool, and we're back again here with a 2005 Honda Accord V6 3-liter, and today we're going to be replacing the spark plugs. The job itself is fairly simple, but we'll still walk through it so you guys know exactly what to do for those of you who aren't familiar with them. But I want to talk real quick before we get into it about some of the things to consider when you're looking at replacing spark plugs and why you might replace your spark plugs. Really, the only reason to replace your spark plugs is because they're a maintenance item, or you'll come across every now and then where you have a spark plug got cracked, something like that, and if you're going to replace one and they've got a bit of wear on them, you might as well put all of them in. But too often, people try to wait until they have a drivability problem, or they got 160,000 miles on the vehicle, and they're like, well, my car kind of runs like crap. I probably just need new spark plugs. As I said before, they're a maintenance item. They are not designed to cause a noticeable difference or make the car run better when they're replaced. They're just designed and supposed to be replaced when the maintenance schedule calls for them to be replaced, and it's just part of keeping your car in good running condition so that you don't run into an issue where excessively worn spark plugs are causing you issues. The other thing is, not with every vehicle, but specifically with this, and you'll run into it with some other ones, but you have different spark plugs based on different emissions labels. And I'm going to pop the hood here, and I'm going to show you where you can see that sticker, and on this specific vehicle what the designation you're looking for is, and where you can find some of the other information that might come up when you're looking for spark plugs on any vehicle. So let's get the hood popped and take a look at that before we get into replacing these plugs. So the emission sticker that you're going to be looking for is going to be right here. I think this vehicle needs hood struts. Anyway, let's try this again. I just realized you couldn't even see the sticker I was pointing at. So I'm going to go off the tripod and we're going to take a look. I'll show you right where it's at. The sticker you want is right here underneath the hood. Let me make sure you can see this. Okay, this contains the emissions, and as you can see, this vehicle conforms to US EPA Tier 2, Bin 5, and CFV LEV regulations applicable to 2005 model year new passenger cars, and California regulations applicable to 2005 model year new LEV to ULEV passenger cars. Now, the most common thing you're going to be looking for is here, where it says "and California regulations." Usually the question you're going to get when you're looking at spark plugs or anything to do with the engine is they may ask you if it's federal emissions or California emissions, and that's where you'll see this. If it just says that it meets the federal regulations and it doesn't specifically state that it meets the California regulations, then it's federal emissions and not California emissions. This one happens to conform to the California regulations, but that's not what we're looking for here. What we're looking for in this case is the ULEV. Let me set this back on the tripod and we'll sit down for a second. Okay, on the sticker that you saw there, that ULEV, it's kind of a funny thing. I can't ever help but laugh at it when I see it. You have LEV, which is low emission vehicle. Then you have ULEV, which is an ultra low emissions vehicle. And the other option that you may see, and they'll ask you when you go to get plugs for these, is the SULEV. That is the super ultra low emissions vehicle. That is about the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I mean, they started off, they had, just the regular vehicles, and then they decided, well, we're going to make these a whole lot better, the low emissions vehicles. Well, then they made it a little bit better, and they said, oh, well, this is probably as good as it's ever going to get, so we'll have ultra low emissions vehicles. And then they got better, and so they literally just threw the word super in front of ultra, which they'd thrown in front of low emissions vehicle. So, yeah, if you have a SULEV, it is a super ultra low emissions vehicle. It's ridiculous to me that they even put that system in place. But anyway, on these vehicles specifically, when you go to the parts store and you ask for spark plugs, they'll ask you if it's the ULEV or the SULEV, and that is where you'll find that information at. If your hood's been replaced and you don't have that sticker, you may be able to take your VIN and talk to the dealership and see if they can give you the designation of what the vehicle was. But for most of the time, that's where you're going to be able to find that information at. And on other stuff for these kind of vehicles and any other vehicles, that sticker on all vehicles won't always be right there, but you'll usually be able to find it pretty easily under the hood, and it'll look real similar to that. And that's where you'll find whether it's federal emissions or California emissions. But without talking any more about that, let's jump into getting these spark plugs replaced. Okay, so we'll start with the front bank and then we'll walk through the back bank because it's very, very similar. Under this cover right here is where we're going to find the coils, and then below them is where we're going to find the spark plugs. So a large flat blade screwdriver for this flathead pin right here and right here. If you don't have a screwdriver this big, a quarter will work. They're just super simple, easy to turn. They don't take much pressure at all. But you turn those, and then this cover straight up and off. Set it off to the side. Oh, I bumped the camera there. My apologies. And these are the coils. And we're going to unplug each of them. We're going to pull them off, and then the spark plugs are underneath there. So let's go ahead and get that done. Now, let me shift the camera around so I can show you how these are going to disconnect. Okay, so like I said, these are the coils. This is one of the coils. And right here on the side, this little tab presses in. You just squeeze it, and you see how it lifts up down there at the bottom. Maybe hard to see, but you squeeze it, and they pull off. Down inside there, it's hard to see, but down around there, there's this little rubber seal, and you just want to kind of make sure that that stays in there and it doesn't come off. So we'll pull the rest of these off, and we'll pull the coils out. Let me shift the camera back. Okay, so we'll get these unplugged, and we'll pull off the coils. On this vehicle, it's going to be really, really difficult to do it, but just make sure you keep these so you know which coils they go back on, because on some vehicles this harness isn't, locked in place like this, and these may be where you could accidentally lay it down the wrong way and put them back in the wrong location, and well, we wouldn't want to do that. These are hex or Allen wrenches. You can have the L-shaped Allen wrench. I just happen to have this on a socket, and this one, let me see if I can make this focus, is a 6mm. Is that backwards? Anyway, 6mm, like I said, the regular Allen wrench, that'll work. I have it on a socket, and I'm just going to go through here, break these loose, grab the impact, zip it off. there are those 3 bolts. Set them off to the side in a safe location. Actually, I usually set them up on the cowl. It's just kind of a habit I get into. Now these coils, they'll just pull out. It's not direly important, but I try to keep them in a spot. Let me zoom out here a little bit, where I can correlate them with the hole they came out of. I try to put them back in the same hole they came out of. Not the end of the world, but it's just something I do. I don't know, it's a pet peeve of mine. Now, down in these tubes are where the spark plugs are, and we'll grab our spark plug socket and we will get those out. Okay, so just use your regular 5/8 spark plug socket. I know it's weird, Honda, why would you use a 5/8? Anyway, just use your regular 5/8 spark plug socket. Break them loose. Now, with these, you can spin them out once they're completely broken loose with an impact if you want, like I'm going to, but don't try to just pull them out, zip them out with an impact without breaking them loose. You don't want to crack the porcelain, even on the plugs you're replacing, and have bits and pieces of it chance falling free and down in the tube. So, now that those are broken loose, impact. There's one. There's 2, and as you'll notice, the impact isn't really impacting, so it's not really working to have to impact them out. It's just spinning them out. And there's 3. Now let's take a look at what we've got. These are Denso iridium. Are they iridium? Yeah, they're iridium. The factory plugs were iridium, so when you're getting plugs, you want to put iridium plugs back in it. These don't look too horrible, really, but they wanted to replace the spark plugs. They've had them in there for a long time. It's a maintenance issue, so we're just going to replace the spark plugs for maintenance. Like I said, this isn't something to fix a complaint or a problem. This is just a maintenance thing. So let me grab the spark plugs we're going to be putting back in here. Okay, so this is where some of you may disagree with me, some of you may not like me. That's okay. But this is my opinion on spark plugs. These are the spark plugs that I'm going to be putting in this vehicle, because these NGKs are the OE spark plugs, as far as I know, for Honda and most of the Asian import vehicles. So I will not use NGK for everything in the world. If I'm working on a Ford, I will put Motorcraft spark plugs in it. If I'm working on a Chevrolet, I will put AC Delco spark plugs in it. If I'm working on a Honda, it gets NGK, and it gets the iridium because it got iridium stock. There's no need to try to go the platinum or whatever. And you don't want to go with the super cheap, $1.99 copper plugs. These systems are fairly intricately designed, and you want to put in there what the systems were designed to have in it. That's what's going to make them run the best and run the longest. So for this Honda, we're using NGK iridium because the stock plugs were iridium, and that is what we're going to use. So let's get these ready to go in. Okay, so here's the plug out of the box, and this little protective sleeve that goes over it is there to keep this from getting hit, keep the electrode from getting hit and bent over, because these come pre-gapped and they're supposed to be at a very specific distance right in there for the spark to jump on or jump across. So this is where I meet a little controversy, because some people completely dislike the fact that I do this. But it's okay to put just a smidgen of anti-seize on these, and the key here really is not to put much, especially so that as it threads down you don't have an excess that with the heat of the combustion chamber right near it, it would liquefy it and let it run down through the threads and into the combustion chamber and create deposits on the plug. So just as you can see, I mean, barely any on there. And you want to be careful when you're setting these down into the spark plug holes, because if you just come up here and set it and drop it down, you could ding that and bend it in and change the gap. So put it into your spark plug socket that's going to hold it, and then run it down and start the threads and move on to the next one. This, like I said, is a very simple job, but it's a good starter step for some of you that want to start working on your own vehicles. Replacing spark plugs on something like this, it's just kind of a good confidence builder. It's real simple to do, much more simple than on some other vehicles. Some vehicles, my goodness, you almost hope they don't come in to have spark plugs replaced. But it's a good confidence builder to help you get a little bit more familiar with your vehicle, get a little bit more familiar with, using tools and getting a feel for how to work on your vehicle. Now, I've started these by hand, so the next step, right, is just grab the impact and zip them down. No. We're not doing that because that is what we would call a bad idea. That you will end up cracking porcelain and creating issues. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, I know people make fun of me for it, I'm just going to run them down with a little speed handle. And you're only going to go just until it stops. This is not what we're going to leave it at, so don't start flipping out at me. And then we're going to switch back to our ratchet and extension. Now, yes, every fastener should have a torque spec, and you should ideally be using the torque specifications. I could go grab the 3/8 torque wrench, and these are probably, I don't know, between 14 and 19 foot-pounds. But as you work on vehicles, you get a feel for how tight these are. You want to make them about as tight as you felt they were when you took them out. Just nice and snug. And I'll show you, because I just ran those down until they stopped, and you can kind of feel it crushing the washer there at the base of the spark plug. And just, you don't want to He-Man it on there. But what you'll feel when I said crushing, this washer down here, it kind of crushes and creates a seal at the base of that tube. And that's what you feel at first when you start to tighten it down. It doesn't snug up real tight, real quick. But, so don't overdo it. Just get them nice and tight and snug, about like that. As you do this, you will get a feel for what is supposed to be how tight. Like I said, yes, ideally everything is supposed to have a torque spec to it, but sometimes you don't always do that. Like wheel lug nuts, I'll use a torque wrench. But the other thing I want to talk about when you're tightening these down is, let me see if I can show you this without adjusting the camera. I may have to zoom it out a little. Okay. So this is how you're putting that down in there. Now, as you tighten that down, as you could see, and I'll show you again here real quick, set this off to the side there. When you tighten that down, keep your hand here on the head of your ratchet. And it's not just for looks. As you're tightening it, you want to hold the head of this ratchet. When you're pushing down like this, you want to keep pressure up. And what that's going to do is that's going to keep this extension and this socket square and lined up with the plug. If you don't, or if you grab down here and you don't keep much pressure, as you can see, when I push here, it wants to push the extension down too, and you can start to turn this socket sideways on that. Let me see if I can make that focus a little better. You can start to turn this socket sideways on there, and you can end up cracking the porcelain because you're side loading it. So just remember, when you're pushing down to tighten it, keep pressure here to keep the force just turning this extension and not pushing down on it. Just a thing to remember. Did I torque that one or tighten it down? I think I did. Yep, I did. Okay, now we're gonna go and we're gonna put the coils back in. Okay, so before you put these in, you want to add a little bit of dielectric compound to it, dielectric grease, and you can buy it in tubes or whatever at the parts store. They'll sell it in little packets up by the counter sometimes, but you just want to make sure that you put something in there. Helps keep the connection between this and that new plug clean and good. Just add a little bit. You don't have to have tons to the end of the coil. Move that up out of the way. Put it back in. Get a little bit more. And just like that. And then put it in. Now grab those bolts that you set off in a safe place. For me, it was up on the cowl, but that's just habit. Start them in by hand because they are not magic bolts that want to start perfectly every time. As you can see, the threads come all the way up to the end, so you want to make sure that they get started by hand. Then this is where it's another one of those kind of feel things. I'd recommend for someone who's not familiar with it to run these down completely by hand or with a ratchet and tighten it up with either a ratchet or a regular Allen wrench. But I'm not pressing the trigger all the way down, and I got a feel for how tight this puts things, and so that is fine. I caution you against doing that unless you're very familiar with how your impact tightens and you've used it a whole bunch and you've done a bunch of stuff like this. Then we will, if this wants to, there we go, clip back down. There we go. And clip back on. Now, for this side, take your cover, set it back on. And you want to make sure these are in that same unlatched position, which is like that, so that, sorry, I got that backwards. So it's like straight up and down. There we go, yeah. Because that will put those blades right there sideways, which is the way they need to be to go down in those holes. And then, yeah, tighten up, which there's not even tightening up, it's just literally turning, and they'll stop. And that side is done. Let's grab these plugs off of there. Now, the back side is going to be very, very similar, but we'll just talk about some of the differences here real quick, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so I just tried to film the back there, and the hood fell on my head. I don't know if I'll include that. But anyway, so I'll show you here, looking from the front of the engine. They're just right here on the back, and it's hard for me to tell if you guys can see this very well, but I'm going to do my best to show you, and then I'll film me doing it. Here is one of the coils, and here's one of the connectors, and here is the next coil over, and this is actually the one closest to the front of the engine, and then this is the middle one, and then right here is the far one, and it's the exact same process. Unplug them, unbolt them, pull them out, keep them in place, and then pull the spark plugs out, new ones back in. I'm going to set you back down on the tripod, and I'm going to film while I do it, but it's not going to be as up close and in-depth as the front because it's similar enough. There's not really much difference, so let's get this done so we can wrap up this job, and I can stop laying on top of a dirty engine. Uh-oh. It hit the ground. It'll be all right. And that's why we have magnets. Okay, one of the things that I want to tell you on the back of these is to, can you see? Okay. To keep the extension on here and stick the ratchet back there and down in the hole to loosen these up might not be possible. You may have to take the extension and socket off of the ratchet and stick the extension side down first up underneath the cowl, and then slide it down into the hole and onto the spark plug, and then put your ratchet down here. There's no need to fight it and try to fit the whole thing down there. You may be able to do it eventually, but it just saves you so much time to do it like that. And then the exact opposite, pull the ratchet off first, back it out, and then bring it out socket side first. And you should be able to get on all the spark plugs like that. Another quick tip. For some of you, your ratchets, you're going to have a little button on the back. You press the button and then the extension will just come right off. These have a little ball in them that's spring-loaded, and so you've got to get enough grip to be able to pull it off. Well, sometimes when you've got this together and down back in there, you can't really get the grip. So sometimes if you grab up real tight against the ratchet and you squeeze, you can push the skin on your hand will push out enough. Let me see if I can get this on camera without bumping it. You can just squeeze it hard enough here that when your skin swells out, it'll just push the ratchet off. So when you're down back there, you can just grab it just right and squeeze hard enough that you can pull it off. And that's how you can pull your ratchet off of your extension back in those holes like that. We got one more to break loose. Now, when you're putting these back in here and you're feeding that extension and socket back down in that hole, be extra careful not to bump the head, the top of that spark plug, and change that gap, because that can cause drivability issues and all sorts of other issues. So do your best not to hit the head of the spark plug on anything. Get the other two in. Alright, we got the plugs in, got the coils back in, bolted down. We're plugging the coils back in right now. Alright, coils plugged back in. Let's see how it starts. Seems good. Let's wrap up. Well, so that wasn't so bad, was it? And the day turned out to be pretty nice. I might not have even needed my jacket. Anyway, there's a couple other concerns and things going on with this vehicle that we might get to take a look at in a couple videos coming up here. And some of you may have noticed this small little engine hoist or A-frame in the background there. As you may have seen, it's sitting over the front end of a Suburban that we may be putting an engine in here pretty quick. Well, I'm going to be putting an engine in. I just don't know if I'm going to have the time with that one to try to film it, but I'll do what I can to get you guys some videos out of that one. But thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you for supporting the channel in watching this, and hopefully you want to check out some of the other videos we got. I'll put a couple like right over here on the screen that you can click on. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.